Welcome to this ASMR. Let me tell you a dreamy story that will soothe you and comfort you. You are in the right place. Let me guide you to a night of restful sleep as I tell you the story of love sparking in a small mountain town. Together we will follow Chrissy as she wanders down snow-coated streets, aglow with the candlelight flickering in old store windows. Let's join her as she navigates the simplicity of small towns with love, wonders, peace, and care in her heart. Perhaps the sweetest of all, we will watch as she may fall in love with a man full of passion, love, and respect. But let's take a moment to find a bit of comfort in the space we are in now. Take some time to settle ourselves in a nice comfy chair or just in bed and simply relax as we listen to the story unfold. Let's join Chrissy as she is in a train. Her breath fogged up the train window. Beyond the frosty glass, a landscape of towering mountains, huge pine trees lazily flickered by. As she looked up, she saw the clouds, dark, heavy, hanging so low she could see the curve of each cloud. It was almost as she could touch them if she would reach out to them. She knew snow was on the way. Gently she touched the window, following the outlines of the clouds. This time of year it seemed to snow almost every day in her hometown. If she closed her eyes, she could remember every bit of her childhood snow days here. She remembered waking up in a nice warm bed, listening to the steady rumble of snowplows sliding piles of freshly fallen snow to the side. She enjoyed laying in bed under the warm pillows and blankets. In her house, they would still have some fur of animals. It was a tradition, and it felt comfortable to lay on that. She remembered she would crawl out of her bed with a blanket draped over her shoulders and just look out over the landscape. Let's join her and be amazed at how perfectly the white flakes would blanket the landscape, subduing every harsh line and turning the world into one with softness and peace. Chrissy closed her eyes as the memories washed over her. She would almost be be there, in fact. The consistent drone of the train wheels and mechanics was like a rhythmic lullaby, urging her to sleep. Kudugum, 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 was driving her deeper and deeper into the depths of the countryside. The rhythmic noise was broken by the door beside her sliding open. It gently broke a nostalgic moment. A waiter, all dressed in red and black, handed her a cup of steaming hot chocolate. It was one she had ordered only a few moments earlier. She held the cup in both her hands, looking at the hot chocolate. A few marshmallows were floating atop of it. She smelled the sweet scent of the chocolate as she sipped down on it, allowing the sweetness to engulf her taste buds and warm her up from the inside. She really longed for that original chocolate, one that they would only serve in this part of the world. But the chocolate wasn't the only thing coming through the door. A man sat across from her. He had a smooth skin, strong jawline, and glanced up at her with kind amber eyes. She vaguely remembered those eyes from somewhere. And as she met his gaze, she knew exactly where from. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other, it was normal to know all. It was something she missed about Hallwattens in Tyrol. She felt as if she was always safe, protected by a community of people who loved and appreciated her. Hallwattens was very warm, hospitable. Everybody took care of each other, looked out for each other and helped each other. It was a real community. For years there was one person who was at the center of that feeling of love and safety, and that was Ludwig. Ludwig was the neighbor boy, the boy she used to catch ladybugs with on warm summer nights. They would frolic through flower-filled meadows with small mason jars, scooping the ladybugs from the flowers. They would lay in the cool grass together, just looking at the bugs, watching the sky above them, just be amazed at the clear blue sky, the bright stars twinkling all over the sky. In autumn, they would journey to the outskirts of town, where farmer fields and orchards were ripe with the bounty of the season. They would meander through flower beds, breathing in the earthy fall air as they got happily lost in the rows of plants. Often they would look at the goats and sheep and the many cows, because milk was one of their main products. When winter came, they would spend all day on the pond by their house. She swore she could still feel the breeze that would lap her in the face as they spun around on their ice skates. Their laughs warming the air around them, just like a small cloud. Then in spring they would slink outside to soak in the warmth of the earth, awakening from its slumber, listening to the water flow gently breaking again. Just the small rivers. They would catch tadpoles, listen to the beavers' gentle calls as they navigated fields of mountain wildflowers. The smell of spring, already it was filling her nose as she thought about that time. It was a beautiful friendship. Really, it was a beautiful childhood. That was largely because of him. They grew up together. They shared their first kiss together. When they were old enough, they went out together. She could write a novel about their time together. But it came to an end when she moved away for college. Now, when they locked eyes, it was as if nothing had changed. Beyond his amber gaze, she saw the same friendliness, the same warmth that had filled her soul for years and years. A smile formed on her lips, and they hugged in a tight, loving embrace. It seemed to cement her in the moment. She almost felt like she didn't want to let go of him, so she wouldn't break that moment, and the illusion would disappear. He asked her how she was. Did she like the big city? And in fact, she didn't quite know how to answer that one. She loved the availability of everything, yes. She loved the motion of the city, of course. The amount of things she had access to, the energy that could be found down every street. But lately, that was not enough. She felt as she had been missing something. She felt like she lost something, and she needed to find it again. She longed for days in fresh air, in the company of white pine and oak trees. She longed for a cozy hometown bakery where everyone knew her name, where she could freely roam the streets, and everyone would talk to her. She told Ludwig the truth of her new life, and he told her the truth of his. He had taken over his family's business pretty soon after they graduated. He loved the work, more or less, but he wanted to explore, to see different places, feel the sun on his skin more months out of the year. Being a real estate dealer, you would think he would have that opportunity, but it wasn't. His part of the job was staying inside, closing deals over the phone. They spoke for the rest of the ride, talking about their hopes and dreams, with little hesitation, no boundaries. It was a free conversation. They found themselves inching closer and closer together. They only paused when the train crested over a mountain and began its descent into Waldwattens. The sight stole Chrissy's breath, replacing it with a flood of warm nostalgia. Just imagine the view outside her window. Picture this: a quiet valley, far from the nearest city, on 3 sides surrounded by huge mountain peaks that seem to kiss the sky, covered in snow. Cedar trees and pines dotted the mountains, washing them in a sea of white and evergreen. On the western side of the valley, a river lays through the countryside. Even in winter, it didn't stop flowing. It was just smaller. Now it was spotted with pockets of ice, dotted with holes where the water bubbled up, providing local wildlife with a place to drink during the cold months. Near the granite cliffs, small farms and huts peppered the landscape. Chrissy could see their old wood and stone fences, which seemed to stretch on for miles, winding around bends and over hills. She could see the small huts still being used, as you saw the camping equipment still standing outside. All year long, hikers would come here, wander through the valleys, up the hills, through the mountains. The center of town lay along the river. It was a typical old Austrian town, cobblestone streets, wooden buildings down the main street, typical chalets lying the river, all brown and white colored walls throughout the entire town, with only dotted with some colors from flowers that hung from the outside. Their scent would waver through the entire village. In spring and summer, it would be perfect, idyllic place. Old church steeples kept watch. It really felt like something out of a fairy tale, a town you would only see on postcards and in your dreams. And even though she had grown up in it, it still took her breath away. Is it good? To be home? Ludwig asked as he watched Chrissy's reaction. There was compassion in his eyes, blended with that playful nature he always carried with him. She had to wipe a single tear from her expressive eyes. She told him it was just wonderful to be home again. When at the station, Chrissy was touched to see the entire building decorated for Christmas. Wreaths, garlands, they hung from the exposed beams of the antique building, turning it into a holiday wonderland. She could see her parents. They came over to her and met her and Ludwig as they stepped off the train. Her mother was excited to see them. She could tell. Ever since they were little kids, her mother wanted them to end up together. She updated Chrissy on his life every time she called, urging her to call him, check in with him. You know, just like mothers do. Now, of course, she wasn't going to have to do that, as they were preparing to leave. Chrissy handed Ludwig a slip of paper with a number on it. She told him it would be nice if they could spend some time together. At the time, that felt a bit like an understatement. After a hearty meal with her parents at a sheltered home, she went off to bed, exhausted from what seemed a long day. She hovered by the window in her old bedroom for a moment, tracing her fingers along the wall as she tiptoed over the old wooden floor. She remembered every knot in the grain and every board that creaked when you stepped on it. Everything was like it was before. Nothing changed there. Nothing ever changed in the small town. Outside, the yards and the street were glowing in the light of the white street lamps. Some of them were not electric, but really filled with gas. Just like in older days, the snow sparkled iridescently. In the house across the way, there was a single light on. She knew the light well. For years and years, every night, she and Ludwig would sit in front of the glass, and they would flash messages to each other with their flashlights. She was thinking about that time when a soft light flashed at her from the window. As she looked, she could see the faint silhouette of Ludwig, just enough to tell he was smiling. He was flashing again at her. They had a secret code. She would write each letter in a notebook. Listen to the sound of the graphite gliding against the paper. Like music to her ears in the still winter night. I missed you, the message read, staring down at those simple words. She felt like she would almost be brought to tears. She remembered for so long. She felt as a part of herself was missing. She never even considered that her part might just be Ludwig. She was glancing around the room for a flashlight, and to no surprise, she found one in the drawer beside the window, just where she left it all those years ago. She signaled back, "I missed you." Doing that, she felt like a kid again. It all went quiet as the next message arrived. It read MMADOPT. Another code. There are dozens of code, but this one she would not forget. They used it at least once a week for years and years. It stood for "Meet me at the old pine tree." The next message was easy. She just shook the flashlight up and down. It meant yes. Chrissy, she just pulled on a warm wool sweater, leggings, boots, along with a jacket. As a child, she always had to sneak out to meet him at the tree. She was old enough now, but she still did it. She had a bag in the closet for occasion, with a large puffer jacket and boots, ready for any time she wanted to meet Ludwig. But now, of course, she simply stepped out the front door into the brisk night air. She could almost taste the pine trees and mountains on her tongue with every breath she took, filling her lungs, filling her being. Just imagine standing there, taking deep breaths. It was invigorating. The fresh mountain air, nothing like the city air, the smog, the gas, the foul smell that was always around some areas in cities. That smell of food cooking all over the place, all those odors mixing together, making you feel numb. It was all gone now. It made her feel beautifully alive, yet small at the same time. She walked through the soundless town with her eyes turned to the sky. The only noise she made was the crunch, 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 crunch of the boots on the squishy snow. It was a sound like no other. That sound forever brought her back to her childhood. Walking in the snow, sledding on the stars, whispering under pine trees. And of course, hot chocolate. The old pine tree was at the end of the neighborhood, down a small hill. It settled in the center of a forest, far away from any neighbors, and at times, even the world. The trees around her, they were coated in a thin layer of ice, just enough to make every branch, needle, and pine cone glisten in the December moonlight. But the star of the show, the center of it all, was the old pine tree, the only one for miles. It had grown to be even taller than before. The tendrils sloped to the ground, lowered down by the weight of the snowflakes and by the age of the pine tree. It looked like an old ice sculpture, a work of art actually, too perfect for this world. Chrissy stood there for a moment, taking it all in, marveling at the sight before her. Her old friend, standing before her, as always, in a welcoming embrace. She truly realized how blessed she had been to have such a beautiful childhood. A childhood filled with ice-coated willows, frog-filled streams, and hot chocolate. She stepped into the pine tree, parting branches with the back of her hand, careful not to break anything. And doing so, she revealed a small cozy area underneath. There was a small wooden bench there. She and Ludwig crafted that one years ago. She wiped a bit of dust off the seat. Underneath, etched into the grain, was a simple message. Chrissy and Ludwig were here, together with a small heart. She couldn't help but smile. She couldn't imagine that life would take them back here again. But here she was. And there he was. Ludwig parted the branches and stepped into the tree with her. His eyes aglow with compassion and adoration. He chimed, I see you can still remember our code. His voice was smooth, calming even. A tone that had calmed her in many situations. He brought something for her. He handed her a cup. She knew exactly what it was. Special hot chocolate, Chrissy said. When they were small, they spent many winter nights perfecting their own hot chocolate recipe. When they were small, they would even send the recipe to the North Pole, hoping Santa would bring them up to his workshop to make some, just for him. But probably he had a better recipe, or the other recipe was so detailed he did not bother to come over. She brought the cup to her lips. As the steam rose over her face, a welcome contrast between her and the night air. The hot chocolate filled her mouth. She was flooded with a wave of nostalgia that warmed her from the inside out. She was flooded with a sweetness unlike any other. You could say she poured the contents of a hot chocolate shop into her mouth. Judging by Ludwig's reaction, he felt the same way. Both laughed, plopping down on the bench next to each other. I swear, I found the recipe and followed it exactly. Ludwig chuckled. Chrissy turned the cup to each side, watching how the thick hot chocolate would leave trails on the sides of the cup. "Oh, I believe you," she chimed. "You were like 7 and would make something that sweet and thick." The chocolate wasn't runny. It was more like, really, like chocolate. So thick that you could not really drink it, but it was just soft enough that you could. They really liked it. They would add some marshmallows on it. They would not go down. They would really stay on top and you would have to push them down. That thick it was. Their laughs died down. They lapsed into a comfortable silence. Not an awkward one, not uncomfortable, but like home. Here, under the icy pine tree tendrils in the moonlight, she felt at home with Ludwig in a way she hadn't been in years. They sat there for hours, talking, their breaths forming clouds with every word they spoke, hands searching for each other. Either a touch, a caress on occasion. The conversation was like a river that runs through town, ebbing and flowing, resting in deep spots for a few peaceful moments before continuing to move forward. Always natural, comfortable, no awkward silences. She even found herself getting lost in his eyes. As a child, she would always think of his eyes like honey. Now looking at them, she could see how true it was. She could see sparkles in them when he spoke of certain things, swirling with emotion when he spoke of others. He was a man who found joy in the smallest of things, very compassionate. He was like a flash of Morse code, or a shared cup of hot chocolate under a starry sky. By the time the night really began to cool, they had been talking for hours. Chrissy, she hadn't realized her teeth had begun chattering until Ludwig extended his suede jacket to her. At first, she tried to tell him she didn't need it, but as he leaned in close, she melted at the touch and let him wrap the sleeves around her. They began walking home together, like old times. Near their homes, they found themselves walking slower and slower, as though they didn't want the night to end. When they reached their doors, they were not sure how to part ways. But at that moment, Chrissy, she made a decision. All those years feeling empty, feeling as if something was missing, she didn't want to do that anymore. As they looked around, the fluffy snowflakes turning the landscape into a scene from a Christmas movie, they gazed up at the sky with delight. It was magic, ethereal, something they had been waiting for all their lives. She gazed down to Ludwig. She watched as his amber eyes continued to stare in awe and wonder at the snowy display all around him. That stare, those sparkles in his eyes, the love of life that he showed, that's why she did what she did next. She leaned forward, wrapped her hand gently around the back of his neck, drew him in, pressed her lips softly against his. As she did so, she felt herself melting into his arms. Her embrace fell into his embrace. When he pulled away, they shared a look unlike any other. It was magic. The look told Chrissy he was going to be in her life for a long, long time. It was almost like in the movies, where at the touch of a hand, a look into someone's eyes, that moment, that precise moment where you know that that is the person you want to be with, the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. Very romantic. That night, she curled up in her childhood bed, knowing she had done something, in fact something she had always wanted. She had the person she always dreamt of being with. Sleep came easily that night. Her dreams filled with nothing but peace. And for the next few weeks, Chrissy and Ludwig, they spent every moment together. Dancing on stone streets, downtown in the moonlight, eating at the restaurants they had at kids, blowing bubbles in the drinks just like 20 years ago. And that night they held each other tightly, whispering about hopes and dreams for the future. Chrissy, she wanted nothing more than a life of happiness and love. That life is the one she knew she could have with Ludwig. They both longed for something in between the city and the country. They knew exactly how to find that.